Welcome to the Honest Healing Podcast, real talk for cycle breakers. I'm your host, Katie Delamon. If you're ready to speak up, set boundaries, heal your nervous system, and build better relationships, you're in the right place. Because you don't need to be perfect to heal. You just need to be honest. Let's go. Welcome to episode 10 of the Honest Healing Podcast. Lose fat and boost energy. Perimenopause nutrition for women 40 plus. In today's episode, I have a great guest on, Ange Clark. She is Australia's leading perimenopause dietitian with a background of fat loss for females over 40. Now, I think 90% of my listeners, as well as my social media followers, are over 40 and even getting more into the 50 plus bracket. So I felt like this was a very potent and important topic. We cover things, obviously, what is perimenopause, how it shows up in our life, and what we can do sustainably as we grow older and different things are shifting in our body. We talk about the importance of gut health and how vital it is to focus on that as we age, the problem with underfueling, potentially the problem with Ozempic and all these peptide or hormone replacement therapies, and how we can use food, exercise, and nervous system support to age gracefully. There's no magic pill and there's no magic diet that's going to help everyone and anyone. We also talk about body image issues and practical tips and takeaways like small nutrition changes you can make today and what can be a go-to no-fuss hormone-friendly meal for busy women. I learned a lot from Ange, and I know you will too. All right. Well, welcome to the podcast, Angie. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Katie.
Yeah, well, it's so lovely to have you on because you are a dear friend of mine and you've come to a few of my retreats. But you are Australia's leading perimenopause dietitian with a background of fat loss for females over 40. So let's jump in right into the topic. Can you explain what perimenopause is? When does it begin? What are the most common physiological changes women notice? And just go a little bit deeper into that for us.
Yeah, well, let's start with identifying what exactly perimenopause is, because I think it's a relatively new term where most women don't actually kind of know that they might be in perimenopause. It's not really quite a specific diagnosis. There's no blood test that you can get that proves you're in it or not. But there are signs and there are lots of symptoms that we can speak to and how our body is physiologically changing over that time period. So, perimenopause really describes the time preceding menopause. And most of us maybe know what menopause is, but if you don't, that's okay. Menopause itself is the 12-month anniversary of our last final menstrual period. So essentially, our reproductive system is shutting up shop. This goes with a whole lot of hormonal cascades. And of course, it's not just about reproduction, it speaks to a whole host of other different things in our body, which we are then starting to see the signs and the symptoms of. So the idea with menopause is that that is just one distinct point in time. Now, the average age for women in Western countries for menopause is around 51 years old, but we don't actually know when we're going to hit menopause, when that 12-month anniversary of the last final menstrual period will come. So perimenopause by default is the time preceding that. Now, this could last anywhere between 1 to 10 years. On average, for most women, it's reported around about 4 to 6 years. And so what does that mean? Well, it's a complete neuroendocrine transition. It's not just about those reproductive hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. They are declining, but perimenopause is the phase they might be fluctuating on their decline. So it's a long process. We don't know when it starts and stops, but we roughly think around about the age of 40 as a female. But I would beg to differ. I think I'm starting to see a little bit more late 30s where women are starting to notice a few signs which might indicate that they're perimenopausal.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the hormonal changes, things like muscle mass, metabolism, recovery. Now, in your most honest opinion, why do you think we are seeing it at a younger age?
That's a great question. I think for females, we're often starting our reproductive life at a younger age. So then it means that menopause might be a little bit earlier for most women. And sometimes there's some speculation around maybe a lot of the xenoestrogens that are in our system, a lot of the plastics, a lot of the hormones that are coming on board, and we're being exposed to a lot earlier in our lives. And therefore, we only are born with a certain amount of eggs in our ovaries. And once we get through that, and once we ovulate and we go through those cycles, then we tend to then stop and cease our reproductive system. So that's possibly a reason for it. I don't think we actually specifically know that to be definitive, but that's kind of the assumption at this stage.
Yeah. And so obviously you're a dietitian and your focus is nutrition. So how does nutrition interact with these physiological changes?
Oh, look, it's amazing. It is absolutely paramount. And I think what's happening to our system, we need to understand what is happening from a physiological perspective, and then how nutrition can work to support that as well. So bear with me, because I think we need to discuss a little bit more about some of the things that are happening and changing, irrespective of you getting symptoms or not. This is just purely as a result of aging, and this is going to happen around from about 35 years onwards. So the first thing that women will probably notice is a change in where their weight is distributed. So I've often had women come in and go, oh my gosh, I think my waistline is expanding. My sleep quality is dropping a little bit. And I literally just have zero energy. Like I've lost my vibe. I just can't get up, even though I haven't really changed anything out of my day to day. So that's the kind of first common signs. Most women will probably spark up and look into it and do something, maybe a Google search or a chat GPT, when their periods start to get a little bit irregular. So the first thing that we look at is those hormonal and reproductive changes happen. So our menstrual cycle will show maybe some irregularity. Our periods may become shorter, they may be longer, they may be heavier or lighter. But for most women, they kind of spark up and go, oh, actually, yes, I've been feeling like I haven't had energy and I'm not sleeping well. And I know my jeans aren't fitting that well, but my menstrual cycle's changed. And now I think I'm in perimenopause. So that's kind of the first thing that sparks a woman's attention. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that are happening underneath the scene or beneath the scene that are happening and occurring that they just don't pinpoint to perimenopause until the cycle changes. That, of course, could also be in line with decreased fertility. So we're often finding that women are having babies a lot later in life. So
Yep.
they're starting to think about babies in their 40s, and all of a sudden they realize that their ovarian reserve is a lot less than what they would have expected for that age. We're in perimenopause. That's a reason why. So our egg quality drops quite sharply. Some women might experience some hot flashes, night sweats. Sometimes that gets a little bit worse as we head a little bit more closer to that menopause or the late perimenopause continuum. We have to remember it is a continuum. So it's not just short and sharp, start and stop. It's really this whole early perimenopause in your 40s, and then you get to your late 40s, early 50s, and then we're starting to get to late perimenopause, and then you're going to go into menopause at whatever age that ends up being. So remembering that continuum is always changing. We are dynamic, we are human, so nothing ever stays the same, and we have to understand it is a transitionary period. That is a normal part of a female's life. Every single woman is going to go through this. And so we need to understand it, accept it, but also know what are the things we can do to be aware of it and to prevent some of the things from a health-related factor that would occur once we get to menopause, and we start to see that happen in a lot of chronic disease states starting to come up. So the other thing, in terms of body composition and our metabolism, is that and this is the thing that I focus on and I absolutely love because it's my area of expertise, is muscle loss. So we start to see muscles starting to decline. We call this sarcopenia for a fancy term. It happens around our mid-30s, but then it accelerates over our 40s, and we start to see about a 3 to 8%, maybe even up to a 10% drop and decline in lean muscle mass over the decade after we hit 30. And so that's a little bit more accelerated. But at the same time, we're starting to see an increase in fat mass, and in particular around our belly. So we call this visceral fat. It's the menopot. Dread awful term. I hate using it, but it's what is thrown out there in the media. And this is, of course, due to that estrogen decline. And what happens is our insulin sensitivity also starts to change. So our metabolism starts to slow down. Now, we have reports and studies that would suggest your metabolism doesn't really smash and burn as we think it does. It might feel like that, but it doesn't actually do that. It remains relatively stable from our 20s right through to our 60s. But what I think is happening is our lifestyle factors are really compounding that, and we're starting to then become slower. Our nutrition quality is a lot less. And so we're starting to see a lot of these shifts in our metabolism. And if we're losing muscle, this is our metabolic tissue, if we're losing that, then our total daily energy intake decreases around 150 to 250 calories a day. So we don't actually need as much food as what we did when we were younger. And that weight, of course, that distribution of where we'd normally put on body fat, hips and thighs, maybe a bit of triceps, is now starting to happen around our midsection. And that's the shift in our genes not fitting the best that they would have normally. But yeah, it's coupled with a whole lot of other things. And if you think about the effect of estrogen and it's declining, we've got things like joint aches and pains starting to happen. So we don't want to train because it hurts, you know. And so this stops women again from becoming active. We've got that joint stiffness, tendon ligament injuries and issues. But then we're also starting to see a little bit of unfavorable blood work. So if you've ever been to your GP at this point in your life and got your regular bloods done, you might notice that your cholesterol levels are starting to change a little bit. So our cardiovascular and metabolic health from that perspective is now starting to show up in our blood work. So we've got some rising LDL cholesterol, maybe triglycerides as well. Maybe our blood pressure's creeping up a little bit. And our risk factor for heart disease goes up as soon as that estrogen starts to lower in menopause. We're just not getting that cardioprotective effect anymore. And one of the biggest things I think for most women is really coming in and losing their, I'm not gonna say memory, but the brain fog is huge. Like brain fog is something that they go, oh my gosh, I'm not thinking as clearly. I'm forgetting people's names that I know, you know, so well, and my difficulty concentrating becomes a little bit harder. And so at a time where, you know, we're in the sandwich generation of trying to, you know, pursue our careers, we're dealing with probably, you know, kids on one side, aging parents on the other. We end up in this situation where we're not giving ourselves the self-care that we need, but we're also really struggling from a hormonal standpoint. So it's not all your fault at this point in your life as well. So yeah, the tolerance to, I guess, our energy and our mood starts to wane a little bit, and we find we get a lot more frustrated, a little bit short-tempered, and also that's, you know, the lifestyle tolerance to what we would normally say, oh, it doesn't bother me, really starts to irritate people as well. And yeah, a lot of gut issues as well. So that's the other thing we need to
Mm.
remember.
So I grew up in a home where my mom and my aunts constantly talked about their changes, going through their changes. So it was nothing new to me about perimenopause or menopause. But do you find that a lot of women come to you not knowing much about it, being a little bit scared and overwhelmed, or just dismissing it?
Absolutely. And I think that's a really big point about, do we even know our bodies now in perimenopause? Did we even know them before? Have we completely ignored them up until this moment in time? So lovely to hear that you were part of a beautiful environment where it was openly discussed, but that's not a lot of women's situation and stories, unfortunately. And the first port of call, if anything is wrong, is we generally go to our doctors, right? So we believe that and trust that they are the best person to have a conversation about this. But unfortunately, because perimenopause and menopause itself is only really new, I mean, it's not new. Women have been going through this for years. It's just that now we've realized that not a lot of the literature or the research or the science in the medical and the nutrition and exercise field has actually studied women, let alone midlife women. So I think it's partly to do with a bit of an aging culture as well. We don't want to talk about it because we don't want to admit that we're getting old, because old means, oh, you're irrelevant, you're invisible. And so for particularly in our culture, a lot of women will enter their GP offices, and if their menstrual cycle is still normal and they're still getting a menstrual cycle, they're basically just dismissed and said, oh, well, you're not in menopause, so you can keep going. But unfortunately, what's happening now is that we know that it's not just a reproductive issue. We have receptor sites of estrogen all around our body. So it really is impacting women's lifestyles and how they lead their lives. Now, about 20% of women will really suffer with perimenopausal symptoms. Around 60% of us will report some sort of symptoms. That's a huge amount. And there's about 20% of us that will coast through and not even realize, right? So if you're having open-ended conversations with your elders, with your aunts, with your mums, and asking them how they went through that journey, then that is amazing. That probably gives you some insight as to what your experience will be. But I think now we've got so much more support and so much more education around advocating for our own health, which I feel is really important. And if you don't have a doctor that supports this and is very dismissive, you can just go and find another one, that is really trained in this. And that's unfortunately the system, is that we weren't heavily trained in perimenopause and menopause. And to be honest, I battled in my industry as a dietitian in a clinical care perspective. I started this journey probably 5 years ago about looking into this, because I just sat in clinic for 10, 15 years listening to women. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. Why is your body fat being stubborn? Why are you not getting the same results from the nutrition and exercise things that we were telling you to do from the literature? Well, it was because the literature wasn't studying midlife women. And so we were just extrapolating that, thinking it would work.
You mentioned the gut before. Let's talk about the gut microbiome. It is, they say it's your second brain, but I honestly feel like it's your first brain, because your body is sending your brain more messages than your brain says your body. So your gut and your body are absolutely number one. Can you walk us through why women in perimenopause should care more about it, and how gut health can influence, well, we know that it influences our mood, our mental health, our body composition. Like, it is the epicenter. It is our core. It's literally where the seat of our soul. So please, let's talk about some common foods and habits that can harm and help your gut life through our midlife transition.
Oh, I think this is one of the most underrated players in perimenopause. It's really something I focus on, and we have to get this right first before we look at anything else. We absolutely need to care for it, because it is absolutely, as you said, deeply tied to our hormones, our metabolism, our immunity, and our mood. It's a
Yeah.
huge player. So let's have a look at what happens with the gut microbiome in perimenopause. So firstly, what happens as that estrogen and progesterone start to decline, it actually has a direct influence on the gut environment itself. So it reduces the diversity of our gut. It reduces the motility, so how things move through our gut, and then the permeability of that, which increases the likelihood that we're going to cause more systemic inflammation. And that is not great for any disease state and or weight management as well. So with that gut diversity, it reduces as we age. We know that. We can see that on those beautiful gut microbe scans. And what happens is it makes women more prone to digestive issues. So we start to see a lot more bloating, constipation, a lot more food sensitivities start to happen in midlife. And that is not your fault. Again, it's biology, it's physiology. So those estrobolome changes also happen. And this is also a really cool system. It's a collection of gut bacteria that actually regulate our estrogen metabolism. So this is disrupted, and it can cause higher circulating estrogen metabolites. That is also linked with things like heavier PMS symptoms, heavy bleeding, fibroids, and also increasing our breast cancer risk. So, too high or too low levels can also worsen our hot flushes, contribute to other things like vaginal dryness and bone loss as well. So it's absolutely huge. And then that inflammatory response, if we are in this, what we call that dysbiosis, so our gut is angry, it doesn't like what environment it's sitting in at the moment, we lose a lot of those microbes, the permeability of the gut happens, and then we end up with toxins in areas that they don't belong in. So this is essentially what we might call leaky gut, or what people term leaky gut. And that then drives that systemic inflammation and worsens our joint pain, our brain fog, our fatigue, and contributes to what we call a obese gut environment. So it actually helps us put on weight.
Yep. And do you personally take a probiotic every day or suggest them?
So these are some things that we can actually look at. Before we do that, I'd generally say let's try and find probiotics from our food. So these are our fermented foods, which we want to be getting in daily if we can. Things like our sauerkraut, our kimchi, our beautiful natural yogurts, which have those wonderful probiotics in them as well. Things like kombucha, miso. We can use a lot of our food-based products to enhance our good probiotics that we get from our food. But the real key factor is actually our prebiotics. So I always say what happens at a party, if you don't provide good food, your guests are going to leave. So we need to have the good probiotics in there, the good gut bugs, but we want the prebiotic fibers to feed those so they hang around a little bit more. And our prebiotic fibers are amazing. They're things that we get from our soluble, insoluble, and resistant starch foods, and also things such as our phytoestrogen foods or polyphenol foods, which are really just beautiful in rich color. So think deep red, purple, blue colored fruits and vegetables. And all of these factors contribute to a wonderful environment where you've got the probiotics and you've got the prebiotics in there at the same time. Now, that being said, there are some certain strains that might help specifically for different conditions. We do have a little bit of the literature now coming out and supporting things like urinary tract infections, and other ailments might be prescriptive if we have a certain probiotic that helps that particular strain and that ailment. The jury is out in terms of the blanket big ones, unless you've been on antibiotics, which do the opposite. So it strips our gut bacteria. Then I would be looking at like a broad-based probiotic daily to kind of support that. And so otherwise, if you're not sick, if you don't have any reason to have extra probiotics, I'd be focusing a little bit more on the food base and the pre and probiotics where you can get from your food system as well. But a couple of other things that harm that system is alcohol, unfortunately. So that
Mhm.
will strip our good gut microbes.
It's a poison.
It is literally a poison. And there is, as a dietitian, I would never recommend increasing alcohol to improve your health. So I'll just leave that with there.
Yeah.
Not shaming alcohol at all. I understand it's such a big part of our culture, but unfortunately, in midlife women, it's the reason that we socialize. It's a lot of the things that bring women together. And I think we could do that a lot better. So yeah, for me, alcohol is a big no-no when we're looking at things to improve our situation just in this really crazy inflammatory state that we call perimenopause. So yeah, that ultra processed foods, we really need to get rid of them in our lives. I think there is some place for them if you are heavily active, but otherwise there's a lot of things going into these types of foods, our food system emulsifiers, a lot of these preservatives that really are irritating our gut for a better reason. If it doesn't make you feel good, please don't continue to have it. So a lot of these, extra added sugars, highly processed foods, other things that are going to really wreak a lot of havoc in our gut microbiome itself. So
You say highly processed food. I know what that is, but for those of those out there who may not know what that is, do you want to go into a little bit of what those no-nos are?
well, I always have this rule, look at the ingredients before you look at the nutrition label. So if you turn the ingredients around and if it's more than 4 ingredients, it's probably likely it's going to be a processed food. So the more ingredients you have in terms of that list, the more likely it's going to be heavily processed. And it also is listed in descending order. So the most something contains will be listed first in that ingredients list. If that's any form of sugar in some way or form, or some sort of processed fat, it's probably not likely going to be the best thing for you. So yes, we can't avoid things in boxes. We need to go to the supermarket and buy these types of things, but look for 4 ingredients or less on those boxed items and really stick to your fresh food market. So I often say, well, I can say in the past, I was saying stick to the periphery of the shops, but unfortunately, they've just strategically positioned lots of different things in different areas now. So I can't say that anymore. But lots of fruit and veggies is the first thing that really nurtures that gut microbiome. The diversity of that plant-based foods that we get is really important as well for our gut microbiome. So when we're talking about fruit and vegetables, it is really important to get a lot of colorful things in there. So eat the rainbow. And then, just normal things that don't really come with a label, like keep it really simple. Go back to wholesome foods, minimal tampering with stuff. That's the sort of stuff that they do in the factory, in the package. And so then by the time it gets to your body doesn't have to work hard for that. And there's no fiber left. And that is the key. One of the huge key factors to a lot of our health problems is that we're just not getting enough fiber because those foods are void of it. So 30 grams of fiber is what we want to be aiming for each and every day. A great start is to just get at least 2 pieces of fruit and 5 cups of salad or veggies every single day. And I can tell you right now, about 94% of the population don't do that.
Nope, not at all. 94% of the population are not in the healthy markers, that's for sure. All right, well, let's go on to talking about underfueling and body composition because I also want to talk a little bit about Ozempic and these hormone balancing supplements and all that stuff. So, why is underfueling such a big issue for midlife women?
Well, because if you've grown up in the 80s and 90s, thinness equates worthiness, it equates, I don't know, love, whatever we want to attach that meaning to. We have just been bombarded with our lives of growing up that thinness means that you're more successful. And unfortunately, there is a big societal message and a cultural issue that we might not be able to change, but it's just getting worse with social media. I think, we're more exposed to that. I talk about what people put into their bodies, but what are you putting into your mind? Like, what are you actually looking at? What are your, I guess, who are your mentors when we're looking at this midlife space? And are they really the best types of people to follow in that regard? So unfortunately, we've grown up with thinness isn't ideal. And so the other thing is lots of cardio to get us there and lots of dieting. So Weight Watchers, Optifast, whatever, you name it.
Master cleanse, you name it.
Biggest
I've done them
loser.
all.
We've all tried. I always like to say, just try anything once, but the biggest key factor is if it doesn't work, don't keep doing it. So you need to do something different. But yeah, that's what we grew up with. So it's obviously then in relation to our body image, our self-worth, our self-esteem, it's all bundled together. And that's just kind of the platform that we've grown up with. So unfortunately, then we carry those messages, those belief systems into midlife. And then at one point, we kind of sit there. And I know I did this. If we get quiet enough, if we can actually hear what it is that we're saying to ourselves, we realize that if we beat ourselves up about our weight and we're perpetually on a diet, this is a lot of women have so much chatter in their head. By the time they come to me, they've gone, I don't think I ever realize I'm never not on a diet. And that in itself is exhausting, right? So we're constantly chasing this diet. When did it actually be okay to eat food? Like, we are humans, we need food to live, to survive, irrespective of whether you're exercising or doing all the other stuff. We need food to help our brain work, help our heartbeat. So yeah, unfortunately, I think that message has been diluted, and then there's been just a bombardment of other messages that come in, all saying the same bloody thing: is just eat less, and to make ourselves small, really.
Yeah. And so let's talk about Ozempic, because Ozempic is justifying under fueling. I personally don't consume a lot of food. I can, but I also know that it doesn't feel good when I do that, and my stomach is only as big as my fist. But Ozempic is literally justifying what we would even call anorexia. And then people are also saying, well, it's not Ozempic, it's another peptide. So can you walk us through like how you feel about this and yeah, just your take on it?
Yeah, this is going to be, I'm saying it now, it's going to be one of the most challenging aspects of healthcare. Um, and I think you're right. Like, it's been masked as the holy grail because we have this weight loss, we've got an obesity epidemic, is what they're saying, right? So,
Yeah.
okay, what is a solution for that? Take this drug, and how it works. It's really interesting in terms of the mechanism. So to put it bluntly, it stops the food noise. And so your brain just goes, I don't think about food. Okay, great. Well, does that mean you don't need to eat? Of course you need to eat. You're human, right? But the other thing is it slows down gastric emptying. So, we just spoke about the differences in how our hormones impact that. So we're slowing that down even further. And so I can give you a little bit of a story about, I've got clients taking them in terms of those drugs. But my biggest concern is that we are looking at weight, and weight in and of itself is not a health marker. We need to start looking at body composition, exactly what we said about what is happening to your muscle and your bone, that metabolically active tissue that's preventing you from, it's actually helping you age better. And what is happening to your fat mass in relation to this? So when we look at very rapid weight loss, which is essentially what it is, it means it just tells your brain, stop eating, and it slows down the food in your stomach. So everything slows down, so you stop eating. And essentially what happens is you create such a big calorie deficit that you lose weight. Now, if you could do that really severely and really quickly, we get rapid weight loss. But a lot of that is coming from lean tissue, not necessarily just body fat. And so we need to be really careful about making sure I think it should be mandatory that people assess body composition, maybe with a gold standard DEXA. So this is a X-ray radiation scan that we get that monitors where your body fat sits, but it also says what is your bone mineral density doing and what is your muscle mass doing, and where is that distribution of fat? Is it around the midsection, or where is it in your body? So if we're not monitoring people well, again, clinical population, there are people out there that are just taking this stuff. There are doctors that are prescribing this, and they have no idea about the metabolic effects that it's going to be happening with our muscle tissue and our lean mass. And I do believe everyone needs to be guided by a dietitian, because what happens is if you're going to be taking in less food, the quality of that food needs to be so bloody good, and your protein needs to be so high for you to not lose any more muscle than you already are going to lose with just rapid weight loss as a just a system thing. So the idea is going, okay, we need to firstly assess the risk. Is the risk of chronic disease a big player in this, or are we just using it just to lose the last 5 kilos, right? I think that's a very different conversation. So in a clinical realm, I mean, they're not new. GLP-1s aren't new. They've been around since about 2005. We were using them quite clinically and quite well. They work really well. We know that they work really well. But the problem is what happens when you come off it, or are you going to come off it? So
Yeah.
what does that long-term data look like? That we don't have. We do not have that long-term data of someone that doesn't even have any chronic disease that wants to go on it purely for weight loss. I want to see 5-10 years time down the track what their body composition is doing and what state of health that they are in. We just don't know just yet. So I'm very hesitant. But if you're going to be using it, you absolutely need to be using it under supervised care with somebody that actually understands what to do to counteract what that drug is actually doing in your system.
Yeah. And people don't also realize that muscle actually regulates your glucose. So the more muscle mass you have, the better your insulin levels are at uh, regulating themselves. And so,
100%. Muscle is a
yeah,
sponge for glucose. And
yeah.
that's exactly what it is. And if we don't have, and if we're not, that brings up a great point. If you're not doing resistance training as well, if you're
Mhm.
not providing that stimulus for the muscle, you're going to lose even more muscle as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed for me, I didn't go to a gym or anything for 7 years. I was just doing a little bit of yoga, not really much. And I started to have all these problems with my feet. And it was from losing muscle. I was smaller but I was just losing so much muscle. And now I just added in a little bit more weight training and all of it is gone. Let's talk about the truth about hormone balancing supplements. And do you also agree with hormone replacement?
Okay, so with the supplement industry, very unregulated, crazy, multi-billion-dollar industry, they are going to play on your emotions. Now, unfortunately, you want to believe in them. I want to believe in them for all purposes of it's going to help change everything, but nothing can ever be found in a drug or a pill that isn't going to be replaced by a lifetime of great nutrition and exercise. So let's just start the scene with that. What we're looking at with a lot of these supplements, and particularly they're heavily marketed to women in midlife because they attempt to cure everything symptomology wise that they're going through. It doesn't exist. They are literally lying to you. When we look at, and from our perspective as clinicians, particularly as sports dietitians, we were always taught to look at what is the body of evidence that would be suggestive that this actually works? Like, do we have actual proof? Have they done randomized control trials? Have they done meta-analyses? Have they looked at particularly women in your population and taking something like that, and does it improve in reality? Have we matched it against a placebo? Because often a lot of these times women will take this and they go, I feel amazing on this. I'm like, yeah, but you're not doing anything with your nutrition and your exercise. Or if you've done both together, you don't know what's working. They attribute it to the pill that they've taken, but absolutely it doesn't. It might help symptomology in some respects, but as long as you have to get a therapeutic dose, so the right amount, a lot of these things are what we call clusters of things, or they're proprietary blends. So you don't know exactly what's in them. They make it elusive and they say it's got all these wonderful things scientifically proven. But unless you know exactly how much in the dose, exactly where it's from, and the effect that it will have based on what other previous studies have shown us, then I wouldn't be taking it. I wouldn't be wasting my money. More times than not, if we're looking at a results-driven purpose, what you do with your nutrition and exercise is going to cover 80% of your results. I often say if you're active, then you need a little bit more help. So we get a little bit more specific with that sports nutrition element, because we're relating that back to what it is that you're doing in terms of your activity level. That's your 19%. Your supplements, 1 to 2% difference. So where do you want to spend your time and money? I know it doesn't cost us a lot of time to take something like that, but unfortunately, it's not going to have the biggest return on investment when we're looking at what effect the other proven things that we can do in our lifestyle that's within our control has on us. Now, that being said, menopause hormone therapy is amazing for some women, particularly women that are suffering in that 20% of women that really suffer from those symptomology, and it's really affecting their life. Where that comes in is that it's not necessarily replacing your hormones, but it's giving your body a chance to cushion the undulation of those hormones on their decline. That's inevitable. Menopause is going to happen, right? But what we're starting to see is for women, if that fluctuation is really quite severe, so if they get more cycles where they don't ovulate, their progesterone doesn't come up, they have this almost relatively high estrogen state relative to the progesterone, but that's causing a lot of symptoms. And then over time, if that hormonal roller coaster is just too unbearable, then I think what happens with hormone replacement therapy is that they come in and it cushions that fall. So it makes your environment a little bit nicer for you to go and do all the nutrition and all the exercise stuff that you actually still need to be doing as well. So it won't help you to lose weight. And this is what people think it will do. It will help possibly redistribute where that weight goes. We were speaking about how estrogen is very much directs where fat is stored. So it might stop it from going in the midsection a little bit more, but it's not going to help you to retain your muscle mass, and it's not going to help you to lose any extra fat. So you still need to be doing the stuff that's going to be contributing to all those positive factors and complementing the use of that HRT as well, or menopause hormone therapy is what it's now called. But you need to get a good practitioner. You also need to keep checking in whether the dosage is right, whether the what form of how you're getting that in versus gel versus patches. So I've had so many women, it's not a quick fix as well. They need to be doing the work and going in and regularly checking and reflecting with their GP and adjusting that dose to get it right for you based on your symptoms.
Yeah, well, that sounds to me from a nervous system perspective that their hormones are fluctuating because their nervous system is fluctuating and dysregulated because they're not regulating the number one, cortisol, adrenaline.
Yeah.
Like, can we talk about that? And it is the silent killer, but it's not the devil. We need cortisol, we need adrenaline to motivate us. It's a natural producing hormone in the body, it regulates our sleep patterns. But can we speak upon how stress is, I believe, fluctuating our hormones? If we can't regulate our nervous system, we're not regulating our cortisol. If we can't regulate our cortisol, we cannot regulate our hormones. So, can you speak a little bit about that as a dietitian and what you've seen as well?
Yeah. Look, I think where people get scared of cortisol is that it's what you term the stress hormone, right? So our adrenals are producing this, but remember, our bodies are a beautiful symphony. Where things go wrong, it's because the signals aren't getting sent to the right pieces of the orchestra. And one of those is just chronic daily stress. So cortisol is produced in response to stress. We actually get cortisol when we exercise.
Yep.
That is a good stress. If we look at the aftermath and the effect of that, that's great. If we didn't have cortisol that rises, and peaks around 2 to 3 hours after getting up, we wouldn't get up out of bed. So we need cortisol in our system. It's just what people really are getting confused with is the chronic underlying low level stress that happens on a day-to-day basis that we're just not having tools to actually counter or even recognize. And that's keeping us in that fight or flight state all the time, right? That central nervous system drive, that, sympathetic nervous system response, and it's keeping us elevated. So we don't ever get the time to that rest and digest, which is really interesting. So if we're not doing those types of things or having ways in which we can counter a lot of that low-lying stress in our day-to-day lives, everything's going to be compounded on top of that. So again, no matter how much exercise you do, how you eat, if your nervous system is dysregulated and you need to address that first, then everything else is going to flow from there as well. So yeah, cortisol is definitely something that we need to take a look at. When I look at the trifecta of what women need to be doing, nutrition, yes, absolutely paramount. Exercise, exercise, yes, that's my lane house. Now, stress management is what I have a discussion about, but then I go, oh, can we palm you onto somebody else with some other expertise? Because it's so important for us to help that. Now, there are some things, as you would know, Katie, your breath work, your yoga, your meditations, things that can calm and help that stress system down a little bit more. And I think the easiest one for me is just to tell them to breathe, right? Like we need to learn how to breathe properly. We're never taught that. But we're also never taught to realize that this hustle lifestyle and mentality wasn't actually designed to be what we should be doing. So it's also that midlife metamorphosis of kind of the light bulb going off and you going, I don't have to do this. I don't
Yeah.
really need to do it. So
Yeah.
again, it's a culmination of different things, but I think the realization's the best part.
Yeah, yeah, where we are creating our own problems. We have created
Yep.
the drama, if you must. So there's no necessarily magic food that just balances everybody hormones, the same way. So, but are there certain eating patterns or what is the ideal balance between the protein, carbs, and fats for aging women or 40 plus? And again, this is probably a person to person depending on their lifestyle, their blood work, all that stuff. But in general, let's go there. What would be that ideal balance? You said 30 grams of fiber a day, which is really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we do have some of those nutritional foundations that we really want to make sure are correct or as close to as what we can get.
Yeah.
So generally we talk in grams per kilogram because obviously everyone in terms of stature and structure is a little bit different. So I won't talk total calories, but what I can talk to is like those macronutrients that do have multiple different functions in our body, and we need all our macronutrients. So by that I mean our carbs, protein, and fat. Alcohol is a separate macronutrient. We've already discussed that. It's not a necessary nutrient, but the other ones are really necessary for us to get all our vitamins and minerals for our body to function optimally. So we generally know that now, as we start to age, our protein needs do go up. So the recommended guideline for general everyday people is just 1 gram per kilogram body mass. We want to kind of almost be 1.5 times that. So anywhere between, as a starting point, 1.4 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of protein. Now, this is of ideal body weight. So if you do have a weight loss goal, I would be eating for the person you would love to become in that instance, or what would be an ideal body weight for you.
I
Um,
love that distinction. Thank you
yes,
for
yes.
clarifying.
Yeah, and it is really important because when people go, oh, you need to eat protein, you can actually eat too much protein and then you have too many
Hmm.
calories in general and you can't lose weight. And you go, but I'm eating all the protein. So there's a dual factor with protein. We become a little bit more protein resistant as we start to age, and that's hence the reason why we need a little bit more of it. We also lose that muscle mass, so we're trying to retain and attain as much as that as we can and stop that decline as we start to age. But also the quality of that protein is really important too. So the quality means where the sources of protein are providing us with all our essential amino acids. And so that becomes really important. So not just the quantity, but the quality of where that happens over the day. And I think for women, we definitely need to start putting a little bit more protein earlier in that day and then spacing it out towards the rest of the day as well. In line with that, then the next category we look at is fat. And now fat is fantastic for our hormone production. So if we don't have enough fat, our brain and our bodies don't produce our hormones effectively as well as what they could. So we roughly say between 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram, again, of ideal body weight when we're looking at fat, and the sources of fat are becoming really important. So reducing a lot of the fats that increase inflammation in our diet or in our bodies, and then replacing that with unsaturated fatty acids, in particular omega-3s. I think a lot of us are really deficient in omega-3s and the effect that has in terms of that joint health and reducing pain and stiffness and stuff like that too. So remember, these are the macronutrients. They're important, but they're countering a lot of those physiological changes that are happening in perimenopause. And then 30 grams of fiber, you mentioned it, absolutely fantastic, which means the choices of carbohydrates we are wanting to have are very whole grain or whole food carbohydrates. We're roughly looking at a baseline of about 2 to 3 grams per kilogram of ideal body mass. Now, this is the part that can fluctuate depending on your activity level. So I always put a little asterisk with carbohydrate. We don't need as much if we're not as active. And unfortunately, our lives when we get to midlife become less about ourselves and more about others. And unfortunately, we're just not moving as much. So the research tells us So we might not actually be eating any more. We're actually not, but because that activity is reduced and then we're losing muscle, we're really starting from a little bit further behind. So that energy that we need and require out of carbohydrates doesn't need to be as much, but it still needs to be there. So that is the biggest thing, is not to go no carb, but please readjust our relationship with carb and get the right source of carbs, because that gives us that prebiotic fiber that our gut actually loves and that our bones actually respond to as well. So yeah, a lot of that's really important. And then that whole idea of the diversifying where the fiber is coming from. So 30 different plant-based foods per week.
Love that. And exercise, talk to me. All the we say that we want to lift heavier 40 plus. What does that look like sustainably?
I think this is a message that's probably been given a little bit too harshly. So,
Mm.
what that really means is that we need more resistance and we need more stimulus, because our anabolic response is less as we start to age. So,
I was
all
just gonna say it doesn't mean more CrossFit, please.
doesn't mean more CrossFit, no. And in some respects, I would argue, because you're probably deconditioned, I don't want to be throwing you into like high intensity sessions with loaded weight bearing on top of that if you're not being supervised correctly. So everyone's going to have a different starting point. The point is just to start. I always encourage any form of exercise, no matter what that looks like, please do it, because you're more likely to continue to do it. Now, that being said, there's some really important things around resistance training, because like I said, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, we're very aerobic focused. We didn't focus too heavily on gym based or resistance or weight bearing exercise, but you don't have to go into a gym to do this. You can just start with body weight things. A really great test is to see how long you can last standing on one leg or getting up off a chair without using your hands. Like, these are really simple tools and tasks that you can kind of cross reference and go, this is actually probably going to be a marker of my longevity. As you said, Katie, with like when you started resistance training, your feet started to improve. I see so many. My mum was exactly like that. Went to a podiatrist, said, "Oh my God, I've got plantar fasciitis, grueling pain in
Two
my feet."
years. And
Exactly, right?
and posterior tibial tendonitis. I don't even run. Ran a marathon in 2016 and I've never run since. And I was, yeah, losing the muscle in my legs and also
Absolutely.
probably in my arms. And I within like a year, I think I lost 2% fat and gained 2% muscle.
Yep.
And that
We
was
call that
really
recomposition.
yeah,
Yep.
and I literally went for one whole year. It was just 1 hour a week with a trainer. That's it. And it was just functional movement. And I didn't lift
That's it.
more than 2.5 dumbbell at
Yep.
all in the whole year. And I went for 1 hour a week. And then after that, I just bumped up to 3 days a week. And even that is only, 30 to 45 minutes, whether it's yoga, Pilates, or again, my own weightlifting. Or sometimes I might do like a Metcon, but that's like once every couple of months. So I've seen a huge significant change in just that small little time frame.
100%. And exactly what you said, that progressive resistance overload is exactly what you did, probably unknowingly, but what you were doing is you were layering and building on what you previously were doing. So you started out a little bit and you got great results out of that. Fantastic. And when your body got used to that, then you needed to up it a little bit more as well. So we talk about having what I call about 1 to 2 reps in reserve. And this is kind of getting you to work at about 80% when you're lifting a weight of any description or doing a resistance exercise. So against resistance. So if that means for anyone, it doesn't actually matter how many reps you do, as long as you're pushing yourself to that. Oh, I think I got 1 or 2 reps left in me and I need to put that down. So that's the challenging aspect or the stimulus that we're trying to look for. And as you get stronger and your muscles start recruiting more of those muscle fibers, and then we start putting on a little bit more muscle mass or hypertrophy, then we can step it up and do a heavier dumbbell or more repetitions, or we can do more advanced exercises. But it doesn't matter where you start. The point is just to start, right? And so roughly we're looking at about the minimum, particularly to defy or slow down that sarcopenia, that age-related muscle decline, having around about 2 to 3 sessions per week. And as we get older, the quality of that does become a little bit higher in that rep range, or just like I said, it just needs to be challenging for you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, what is one small nutrition change a woman can make today that would have the biggest impact? That's
Oh my
probably a bit hard to answer, but do your best. Maybe it's top three.
I love a top three. The first thing I would say is 30 to 40 grams of protein at every single meal, particularly breakfast. If you're going to choose one meal, then at least make it breakfast. So
Because that is where your glucose starts circulating. So I always say breakfast isn't the most important. The most important thing is what you put into your body's first thing.
100%, and it sets you up for the rest of the day. So
Yeah.
we have this theory that's called, it's still a theory, it's not exactly proven, but what we see a lot with particularly women is that we have a bit of a protein threshold, and if we do not meet that threshold, we will continue to eat lots of other food, maybe probably predominantly carbohydrate, ultra processed foods, and fats, until we hit the protein threshold, and then our satiation or our appetite hormones kick in. So if we're not getting the fiber and the protein, our satiation, or that ability for our brain to go, hey, you know what, you're full, let's stop eating, doesn't happen to be quick. And so unfortunately, that's where we see a lot of that weight gain happen. So second to my protein, first thing in the morning, is getting that fiber intake, as we mentioned, that 35 grams. And always just say, just start with 2 pieces of fruit and 5 cups of veg. And if you're like 1 cup of veg, then maybe aim for 2. And if you're 1 piece of fruit, don't be afraid of fruit. Please don't be afraid of fruit. That's going to be a really big chunk to your fiber intake anyway. So that's a really kind of easy way to remember to do that. And then resistance training, because we need that in there in our lives. So I just think for women, it needs to become a non-negotiable. I think we often just put ourselves last on that list. But if you find space, all I need you to do is find space in your calendar for it. And then whatever that is, hopefully it's resistance training a couple times a week. But if it's not, then it's any form of movement, or it's any form of, like, maybe it's a yoga, or it's something that if you're particularly stressed, you want to choose to do something else in that space, but carve out that time for you and you yourself, because that self-care is so important.
Yep. Yep. And final message to women in perimenopause who are feeling frustrated or stuck.
This needs to be a lens change. This is your most pristine preventative pathway before you hit menopause. And this is where we see a lot of the problems. It's why I love working with perimenopausal women. You have a choice. You can realize now that if you're frustrated and you're stuck and you're feeling like that, then this is the time. This is your sign. And it's not too late. Definitely never too late. But I think you've got a really important position. If you can prevent something from happening, now is your time. And that's what I love so much about this, is the runway into menopause, is that this is the midlife metamorphosis we talk about. This is your opportunity to have a better second chapter, and it absolutely starts now.
I love it. So where can people find you and your work, Angie? Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. So I'm probably most active on Instagram. So if you want to follow me at Angelique Clark _nutrition, also on Facebook underneath that same name, and just my website, angeliqueclark.com.au, to have a look at multiple ways that we can work together. I've got many service pathways to be able to access any woman at any stage, but all with the design to really get you reconnected to your body and nourish your better existence.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for your time, wisdom, and your expertise. And thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much to everybody who's been tuning in to the Honest Healing podcast. I can't believe we're already at episode 10. And I'm not going to lie, when I first started this podcast, I said, I just want to do 10 episodes and see where I'm at. And I'm not going to lie, this podcast is taking up a lot of time and a lot of energy, but I love connecting with people and I love sharing all of the stuff that I've been sharing. This is stuff that I'm wildly passionate about, and I have some incredible guests coming up in the pipeline. So I'm going to continue the podcast, but I would also love to hear from you on what you want to hear more of. Maybe you have a specific guest in mind, or maybe you have a specific question. Please drop it in the comments, send me a DM, send me an email. You can always jump on my website, www.katiedelamon.com, or find me on any social media handle just as my name, Katie Delamon. If you want to read about my wild ride from mindlessness to mindfulness in my debut memoir, Trust the Flames, you can grab that also on my website or on Amazon, usually the quickest and the cheapest. And happy 10th episode. This podcast has been listened to in over 37 countries already, with over 1,000 downloads, which is pretty incredible in my eyes to me. So thank you again to everybody who's been tuning in. And please Send me a message. Let's connect. I'd love to hear what you want to hear more of.